you think you know everything about Japanese gaming, right? Mario, Zelda, Final Fantasy. Sure. But there's this whole other world bubbling under the surface. A world where tiny teams are making games in cramped apartments, where old arcades are being transformed into indie showcases, and where the spirit of creativity is alive in ways the big studios forgot about years ago. Today, we're diving into Japan's gaming culture, focusing obviously on indie games, and I'm taking you on a tour of some magic places.
I mean, this place is incredible. You can find anything there related to gaming.
There's a whole world under the surface, and we're gonna discover it. Maybe not today, maybe not with this weather. So, grab your passport. We're going on a trip. Yep, it's snowing in Tokyo. Here's the thing about Japan and indie games. For the longest time, they didn't really exist. Not in the way we think about them in the West, anyway. Japan was very much dominated by the console giants. If you wanted to make games in Japan, you worked for one of them, or you didn't make games at all. But at the same time, there was this thing called the Doujin culture, and it started long before indie games were cool on Steam. It originally referred to self-published creative works, like manga, novels, and music, made by fans or small groups. Games naturally became part of this scene once personal computers became more common in the 80s and the 90s. Doujin basically means self-published creative work, and it includes games. This is important because Japanese indie games did not grow as a rebellion against big studios. They grew alongside fan culture and hobbyist creativity. And this is something you can still feel today. Many Japanese indie developers do not call themselves indie developers at all. They are just people making games because they want to. And then at some point, digital distribution started becoming a real thing. Steam opened up to Japanese developers. Sony launched programs specifically for indies. You could just make something cool and put it out there. One of the first major success stories was Cave Story, made by a single developer named Daisuke Pixel Amaya. He spent 5 years making this game in his spare time, and it became a cult classic. It proved that one person with enough dedication could create something that resonated globally. Then you had games like Touhou Project, a series of bullet hell shooters made almost entirely by one guy, Zun, with the first official release in 1997. These weren't backed by corporations. They were sold at doujin conventions, grassroots events where fans and creators met face to face. The doujin culture in Japan became a huge launching pad for indie games. Comiket, the massive convention held in Tokyo, started having entire sections dedicated to indie games. This is the Tokyo Big Site, where the Comiket is held twice a year, usually in August and December. It can attract more than 500,000 attendees. But why are places like this still so important in Japan? Here in Japan, physical sales matter a lot. So places like this are very important. And doujin games play a huge role here. Thousands of indie titles released every year, and many of them never leave Japan. This is incredible. What makes Japan's indie scene unique is how it blends this doujin spirit with traditional game development polish. Japanese indie developers often come from backgrounds in illustration, music, or even just pure fandom. They're not always formally trained in game design, but they bring this insane level of craft and attention to detail. Now, let's talk about Tokyo. When you think Tokyo and games, you probably think Akihabara, right? Electric Town, the neon paradise of arcades and anime shops. And yeah, Akihabara is still important, but the indie scene isn't really there anymore. It's moved to quieter, weirder corners of the city. But to be honest, indie game spaces are really difficult to find. There are some retro gaming shops here and there, but they're not all concentrated in the same neighborhood or dedicated exclusively to indie or doujin games. So I visited different neighborhoods in Tokyo, trying to find the ones where the gaming culture is more present. The first one I visited was Shimokitazawa, or Shimokita as locals call it. It's this artsy bohemian neighborhood filled with vintage clothing stores, tiny theaters, and live music venues. It's the kind of place where creativity just oozes out of the walls, but not exactly the right place for indie game lovers. Then, obviously, I moved to Akihabara. Okay, so Akihabara does still have some indie presence. This place hosts regular events where developers can showcase their games, meet other creators, and connect with fans. It's less of a permanent venue and more of a community space. The atmosphere is super welcoming. You would expect to see students showing off their first Unity project next to veterans who've shipped multiple titles. Everyone just there to share ideas, get feedback, geek out together. At least, that's what I thought. The reality is a little different. It feels more like a place that's been transformed, tuned for tourists, stacked with anime merch, Pokemon cards, and retro nostalgia. Are there Doujin games in there too? Probably. But they're buried, blended in with everything else, and honestly, hard to spot. More than once I found myself turning something over in my hands asking, is this an indie game? A retro game? A fan remake? Maybe all three at once? But then, someone pointed me to Traders. If you love retro gaming and Doujin games, Traders in Akihabara is the place. It's a multi-floor labyrinth of used games, Doujin soft, and obscure Japanese PC titles that most of the world has never heard of. And the higher you go, the stranger and more wonderful it gets. Stacks of CDs from Comiket, games made by a single person, printed in batches of maybe 100 copies. Some of them are brilliant, some of them are absolutely unhinged. All of them are fascinating. And then there's Super Potato, this incredible multi-floor store where you'll genuinely risk your life climbing these tiny, steep stairs. But trust me, it's worth every step. Standing there, I felt it for the first time. The actual gaming culture of Japan, all around me.
I mean, this place is incredible. You can find anything here related to gaming. Every kind of console, every kind of game, old games, new games, indie games, everything. This is incredible.
After days of wandering through shops and market stalls, something finally clicked. Doujin games and indie games, the way I'd imagined them, they're still elusive, still hard to pin down. But here's what's really starting to surprise me. There are retro games everywhere, rebuilt for PC. Not official remakes, fan remakes, passion projects. And the more I look, the more I wonder if part of what I've been missing is a deeper misunderstanding about what Doujin even means, and where it ends and PC gaming culture begins. Welcome to Osaka. By the way, that's the Osaka castle. But anyway, I didn't want to talk about the Osaka castle. I wanted to talk about something else. A couple of days ago, I went to this art gallery, retro gaming shop in Tokyo. A very nice place, amazing place. The owner of the shop was really nice. And at some point, I thought I could ask him about Doujin games. So I asked the owner, where do you think I could find some Doujin games? And he looked at me and he was like, you mean PC games? I started thinking, why did he associate Doujin games with PC games? So probably everything started because fans wanted to remake old games, old console games for PC. And then at some point, someone started thinking, you know what? What if we just don't remake old games? What if we make our own games?
So I don't know if someone of you can help me with this. I just need an answer. Or have I missed something in this? Let me know.
I don't know. I kept thinking about this association between PC games and Doujin games on the Shinkansen from Tokyo to Osaka. Maybe it's just a theory. Maybe it makes sense. Who knows? Anyway, speaking of Osaka, it has a different energy than Tokyo. It's louder, friendlier, and way more obsessed with food. But when it comes to indie games, Osaka has something Tokyo doesn't: a deep connection to arcade culture that never really died. It seems that in Osaka there are these tiny arcade bars that give indie developers a chance to put their games on actual arcade hardware and let people play them in a social setting. It's a throwback to the golden age of arcades, but with a modern indie twist. But I got to be honest, this city didn't hit me like Tokyo. It was surprisingly chaotic for Japan. So we decided to move on to another city pretty fast.
Welcome to Kyoto, which basically is the anagram of Tokyo. This is the historical part of Japan: gardens, geishas, temples, but it's also the house of Nintendo.
And while Nintendo isn't exactly indie, the company's presence has created this weird ecosystem where game development is just part of the city's DNA. You won't find as many visible indie game spaces in Kyoto. The scene here is more underground, more connected to universities and small studios. Kyoto has several game development programs, and a lot of indie developers got their start studying there before branching off to their own thing. One spot worth mentioning is BitSummit, one of the biggest indie game festivals in Japan. It started small here in Kyoto but has grown into a major event that attracts developers and fans from all over the world. The festival takes place at Miyako Messe, a convention center that transforms into indie game heaven for a weekend. Like Osaka, Kyoto also has a handful of small game cafes and bars where developers hang out. These places aren't advertised online. You kind of have to know someone to find them. But if you do get in, I'm sure you'll meet some incredibly talented people working on projects that might be the next big thing. Or might just be a passion project they'll never finish. Either way, the conversations are gold. I also noticed that Kyoto has a small but growing scene for English language indie games. There are a few cafes and co-working spaces where international developers and Japanese developers meet up and share projects. It's cool to see that cross-pollination happening. So, how does all this compare to how we sell indie games in the West? The biggest difference is physical versus digital. In North America and Europe, indie games are almost exclusively digital. You release on Steam, maybe itch.io, maybe consoles if you can afford the dev kits and certification process. Physical copies are rare and usually reserved for successful games, getting a collector's edition later. In Japan, physical is still king, especially in the doujin scene. Yes, digital distribution is growing, and Japanese developers are definitely using Steam and the Nintendo eShop. But there's still this strong culture of wanting a physical object. Fans want the box, the manual, and the bonus art. It's a completely different mindset. Another difference is community. Western indie developers rely heavily on online communities, Discord servers, Twitter, Reddit. Japanese devs do use social media too, especially Twitter and Pixiv. But the in-person community at events like Comiket or regional game markets is still a huge part of the culture. You meet your fans face to face, you get instant feedback, and you build relationships that way. Marketing is also different. In the West, we are obsessed with trailers, Steam wishlists, influencer coverage, all that. In Japan, a lot of doujin games succeed just by word of mouth and being at the right event. Your game gets noticed because someone played it at your booth, told a friend, and it snowballs from there. It's more organic, but also harder to scale. Price-wise, Doujin games are usually cheaper than Western indie games. You'll find games selling for 500 to 1500 yen, which is like $5 to $15. Part of that is because the production values might be lower, but also because the culture isn't about maximizing profit. It's about sharing your work and being part of the community. And what makes Japanese indie games different? Why do they feel distinct from Western indie titles? A lot of it comes down to cultural influences and the way Japanese creators approach game design. First, there's the Doujin culture I mentioned earlier. This idea that making games is an extension of fandom and personal expression. Many Japanese indie developers aren't trying to make the next viral hit or get acquired by a big studio. They're making games because they have a specific idea or aesthetic they want to explore. That leads to a lot of experimental, niche titles that might not have mass appeal but are absolutely perfect for the right audience. Second, there's a strong emphasis on craft and polish, even in small projects. Japanese indie games tend to have incredibly tight controls, beautiful pixel art, or deeply atmospheric sound design. Even if the game is rough around the edges in some areas, there's usually at least one element that's been refined to perfection. This probably comes from Japan's broader culture of shokunin, or craftsmanship. The idea that whatever you do, you should do it with care and respect. Third, Japanese indie games often lean into nostalgia, but in interesting ways. You'll see a lot of throwbacks to 8-bit and 16-bit eras, but they're not just retreats. Developers take those classic mechanics and twist them, adding modern design sensibilities or unexpected narrative depth. Games like Downwell or Minute are great examples. Simple concepts executed with laser focus. If you're planning a trip to Japan and want to experience the indie game scene firsthand, don't be afraid to explore random shops. Some of the best finds are in tiny stores that don't show up on Google Maps. If you see a staircase leading to a basement shop with a handwritten sign, go check it out. That's where the magic is. If you ever get the chance to visit, do it. Play the games, meet the developers, soak in the culture. And if you can't make the trip, seek out Japanese indie games online. Support them, share them, talk about them. The creators deserve all the love they can get. Let me know what you think in the comments. Have you played any Japanese indie games? Are there any spots I missed? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And like always, thanks for watching!
Osaka, 浅草、銀河線